Hello and welcome to this videocast and podcast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, I'm going to talk today about what I call the web. The web is the network in the hidden that coordinates and engineers events in the scene. Events, people making speeches, wars, manipulated financial happenings that in the world of the scene appear to be random, appear to be apart from each other, but in fact are expressions of the same agenda, the same web, pushing the world in a particular direction. And when you put all these apparently random happenings together, you see that direction very clearly, and also very clearly that it's not happening by accident, by coincidence. And when you understand the nature of this web, then suddenly it all makes sense. Because what so many people say in response to the suggestion that there is some kind of global conspiracy going on is, how could they coordinate it all? Well, when you appreciate how the web works, well, that becomes clear. And suddenly an impossible conspiracy becomes actually very explainable. And in its basic form, very simple. If you look into the realms of quantum physics, it's very obvious that everything is connected to everything else. Everything is an expression of everything else. And as the realm of the scene is again an expression of this unseen, then you must have the same thing here as you have in the quantum realm. That is, everything is connected in some way. And when you get into the nature of this web, you're looking at seriously obvious connections between everything. There is a spider, a force in the center of the web that dictates the direction and the behavior, the decisions, the actions of those attached to the web. And so you can get to the outer part of the web, and things will be happening in government, in banking, in media, in all these institutions that appear again to be random, appear to be unconnected. But actually, if you take it back, it's all being directed from this central force. And how the web works is this. You've got the spider, the dictating force that I talk about at length in my books, at the center. And immediately around the spider, you've got the most exclusive secret societies and secret groupings. And within the web itself, only that exclusive area close to the spider actually has the full picture of what's going on, or at least near the full picture of what's going on. And as you come out from the spider, you go into the realms of secret societies that we know about, into the Freemasons, into the Knights Templar and the Jesuit order at its inner core, and so on. They operate in the public arena in terms of the fact that they are known about. But of course, what goes on inside is not largely known about. And when I talk about the Freemasons, I'm not talking about every Freemason. This web is fiercely compartmentalized. So, as I say, people out here in the web will not largely know there is a bloody spider. Never mind it's coordinating what's going on around them and what they're doing. And in the same way, these individual organizations within the web are compartmentalized. So you look at the Freemasons and you've got these levels of degree. And you only know the next level of knowledge once that level accepts you that you can become part of it. Otherwise, you stay at the lower levels and in ignorance of what goes on there. And it goes on and on up the pyramid, if you like, until you find the very few at the top who actually know what it's all about in terms of the secret society or the organization. The rest of them just know a bit. Down the bottom, know very little. So you continue to come out from the spider, and eventually you reach a point some way out where the hidden meets the seen. And at that point, you see organizations like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome. They are cusp organizations, as I call them, which are at that point where the direction, the agenda dictated by the spider from the hidden enters the scene. So through these organizations and others, this agenda is coordinated and communicated into the organizations that we do see. These are governments, government agencies, banks, media organizations, all again fiercely compartmentalized, so the vast majority within them have no idea what the few at the top in those organizations know. And in this way, you can coordinate a whole global direction for the world in country after country after country, while the vast majority who are working to make that happen because they're just doing their job have no idea that there is any coordination because they are compartmentalized from that knowledge. And so you see things happening in this country or that country or this culture or that culture which appear to be decisions made within that arena, that country. But in fact, it's centrally coordinated, just like a transnational corporation has a headquarters and then dictates to all its subsidiaries, which all follow the diktat and the policy, if you like, of the headquarters. And if you can have access to this web in some form and get access to what its game is, what its agenda is, that's when you can start predicting the future with great accuracy. Not because you're sitting in a darkened room, pulling things out of the ether, but because if the agenda of this network is not stopped, if something does not intervene to stop it, then it's going to happen, it's going to play out. And so if you can get access to what that agenda is, either by being an insider or by doing decades of research, then again, unless something intervenes to stop it, you can say this is what is very likely to happen. And again, you can be proved right, because there's not been this intervention to stop the process playing out. And so what you have is basically two hierarchies. You have the hierarchy in the scene, which we call presidents, prime ministers, government ministers, heads of banks and corporations and media operations. But that's not the real hierarchy. The real hierarchy of power is in the unseen realms of this web. And those in the hierarchy of the seen are merely there to give people the illusion that what they see is what they get, and that somehow voting for this party or this person or that person is influencing what's going on in some way. Overwhelmingly, it's not, because that's not where the power is, only where we're manipulated to believe the power is. And so we have, well, this week of all weeks, we've had the 90th birthday of the Queen, who is the head of state in the United Kingdom and many Commonwealth countries. And she appears to therefore be at the top of the hierarchy in those countries. But if you go into the hidden and that hierarchy, the royal family may be up there, but they're nowhere near running the show or at the top of the hierarchy with the real power. And everyone, even the royals who are serving the web, are expendable to it, no matter whether you're in politics or banking or business or whatever. While what you do is beneficial to the agenda of the web, then you'll be looked after and you'll be protected. You will, for instance, be protected often in terms of your own health. I mean, look at some of these classic web people, like the Queen. She just turned 90. You got her mother, who died at the best part of 102. You've got Prince Philip, who's 94. You've got David Rockefeller, massive web person, who's 100. Henry Kissinger, 92. And so it goes on. And the reason is because they are web people, in knowledge that they don't get the same treatment that the rest of the population do. And they'll be protected from scandals, and they'll be protected from things that could bring them down until they become expendable to the agenda, and then away you go. What happens doesn't really matter to the web. All it matters to that is that its agenda keeps playing out. And you see the web at work in so many endless ways every day. You have the coordination of wars, where these different people in different countries all come together supporting the same thing that brings about a war, or they'll support the perception that this regime is evil and must be removed because the web wants it removed. And you see it at the moment so clearly in this debate that's going on in relation to the European Union referendum in Britain over whether the public should vote to stay in the EU or vote to come out. And it's funny, really, because we got 60 odd million people in this country, and it's supposed to be a massive public debate on whether we stay in or whether we come out. And yet you look at the two groupings that are leading this debate, who are the major personalities of this debate, which are always being quoted and counter-quoted in the media. And it's a very small world indeed. On one side, you've got the Prime Minister David Cameron and his Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. And on the other, the major personality is a bloke called Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is talking about the need to come out, and the other two, the need to stay in. Now, the Web wants the UK to stay in because its agenda is pulling more and more countries into the European Union and focusing more and more power at the centre to create this massive dictatorship, bureaucratic dictatorship. It's all part of its agenda, as I've written and talked about elsewhere. So the last thing it wants is for the British public to vote to come out. And here we have, on this postage stamp debate, we have David Cameron on one side, Boris Johnson on the other, who went to Eton College in the same period. Eton College, this elite college near Windsor Castle, where the royal children go. And they were both members at the same time at Oxford University of something called the Bullingdon Club, which is a dining club for students with very rich parents. And it's infamous for trashing restaurants and trashing other places, just jolly japes, and then the rich parents write the cheque to cover the damage. And another member of the Bullingdon Club was George Osborne, who's the buddy of Cameron pressing people to stay in the EU. So it's a very small world indeed, where at the centre of this debate about whether we should come out or stay in. Then, just arrived in this country as I speak, we have Barack Obama. Now, he's another web person, owned by the web, controlled by the web, put into power by the web to serve the interests of the web, just like George Bush before him and him before him and him before him, etc. And he is saying that Britain should vote to stay in the EU. It's none of his bloody business. But he's a web person, so he's serving the interests of the web, which is to stay in. And this is a story very soon after he arrived in a British newspaper. Barack Obama visit UK more effective at fighting terror inside the EU. The web uses the terror thing all the time to get people to be frightened into doing its will. And even with the EU, play the terror card. And it says the UK's ability to fight terrorism would be more effective if it sticks together with its European allies, President Obama has said. He said, being inside the EU magnifies Britain's influence across the world. He's got no influence in the EU. Boris Johnson, for it is he, said President Obama's view was a breathtaking example of the principle of do as I say, but not as I do. No. That's what it may appear to be in the seen. But in the hidden, it's do as we tell you to do. Okay, yeah, you'd be better in the EU. Obama said that he recognised ultimately the matter was for British voters to decide for themselves. They always throw that one in. Oh, you must stay in. All these are the terrible things if you don't stay in. But of course, it's your choice. You know. The outcome of your decision matter for the British people, he said, but it's also a matter of deep interest to the United States. And then, outrageously, he tries to exploit the mass killing of Americans, as with vaster numbers of others, actually, in the world wars. Wars that were demonstrably, provably engineered by the same web that holds Obama by the dangly bits to serve its interest of continual and massive centralization of power, which is what the two world wars did. And it's continued since. What he said was, the tens of thousands of Americans who rest in Europe's cemeteries are a silent testament to just how intertwined our prosperity and security truly are. And the path you choose now will echo in the prospects of today's generations of Americans as well. No, it won't. Whether Britain is in or out the EU doesn't matter. But say anything, because the web demands it, to keep Britain in the EU, because that's what the web wants. We've had not just Obama, but a stream of people coming out, web people again, trying to get the vote result that they want. And we've had a series of former US Treasury secretaries who've come out and said, oh, you must stay in, oh, it'll be terrible if you don't, basically. And it's interesting to see who they are. One of them is George Shultz, or George Schultz. Another one of these blokes, he's 95. And he was in the Nixon administration. And he was also Secretary of State to Ronald Reagan. And he's in many of my books because he's a web person to his DNA. Then there's Robert Rubin. He was Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary. And he worked with the head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, and others like Timothy Geithner and Lawrence Summers, to deregulate the financial arena, remove checks and balances, which led, in an engineered, coordinated way, to the financial crash of 2008. Now, which of course allowed the transfer of fantastic amounts of money from people through governments to this elite, this web elite, through bailouts. And then here's two others on this list saying, oh, you must stay in the EU. Well, because they care about the British people. I mean, here they are. Lawrence Summers and Timothy Geithner, who worked with Rubin and Greenspan to bring about the crash of 2008. Lawrence Summers was in the Clinton administration. Timothy Geithner was Treasury Secretary to President Obama. And what happened is that after the crash of 2008, Obama brought in Summers and Geithner, who played a significant part in bringing about the crash, to be his financial wizards to sort out the crash. And how did they decide it was going to be sorted out? By giving the banks they represent vast amounts of money, which then justified austerity. All this money to the banks, we ain't got no money. And there's another on the list, is Henry Paulson. He was the Treasury Secretary to Boy George Bush when the crash happened. And he's the former chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. So he's a guy to be trusted. And he was the person who immediately reacted to the crash in the latter period of Bush, and he decided, the only way out of this is giving vast amounts of money to the banks. So these are the people, again, web people, all coordinated, that are being brought out to try to frighten the British public into doing the will of the web. We've had the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which, like the World Bank and these other institutions, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, they're all creations of the web to serve the interests of the web. So, of course, the IMF's going to come out and say, oh, God, it'd be terrible if you came out of the EU. And then you've got Mark Carney, who's the head of the Bank of England, Canadian bloke. He's gone as far as he can get away with to also try to say, oh, it'll be terrible coming out. Because another web person who, like other heads of central banks, is coordinated in terms of coordinated policy, common policy, through something called the Bank of, or the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Another web organization designed to coordinate financial policy between central banks that push the world in a certain direction. We've had the British Treasury, headed by George Osborne, coming out and saying how bad it will be if we leave the EU. Again, serving the interests of the web. And when you look at this example of the EU referendum, you see the political hierarchy, the political establishment, and the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, etc., the Scottish National Party, who's supposed to be anti-system, well, they should be ashamed of themselves, frankly, because they're serving the system by supporting the web in saying Britain should stay in the EU. But when you look at the political establishment, then you look at the super rich and the financial establishment, all these expressions of the web are coming out in support of staying in the EU, and that's because that's what the web wants. And so we face a situation in terms of the British public where we either go on allowing this network to dictate our lives and dictate how we vote in this referendum, or we open our minds to what's really going on, have some backbone, and do what the web doesn't want us to do. And, let's have no, illusion that if Britain does vote to come out, well, the web, through the EU and other institutions, is not going to go quietly. It's going to do everything it can to make sure that people reconsider in the light of events which they will create. And then they'll come back and say, well, let's have another referendum, see if you want to go back in, and reverse the other one. They've done it so many times. So the referendum is only the start of this, really, if it goes against what the web wants. But surely it's time to draw a line and say here and no further, and stop being dictated to by a hidden hand with a nightmare agenda for the world, and start to look it in the eye and say, whatever it takes, we're not having it anymore. And when you realize that this web exists and how it works and what its agenda is, the world looks a very, very different place, and world events can be seen in a very, very different light. And that's why getting this information out about how it all unfolds is so important. And I can see from in my own experience over the last 25 years how more and more people are starting to get it, are starting to see it, are starting to see how the game unfolds, and thus ceasing in ever greater numbers to be fooled and manipulated by it in the way they were before. And but that comes with responsibility. The responsibility being, even if we don't like some of the consequences, we have to do what is necessary to stop this web dictating the agenda for the world that it's worked towards for so long. And only one of the ways we can do that in Britain is to vote to come out of the EU and control by unelected bureaucrats who, again, are just servants of the web.